Hello all and welcome to another episode of EdTransformed. EdTransformed is brought to you by School of the Future International Academy, in short, SOFIA. We are a non-profit, non-governmental organization which supports educational institutions from around the world in their effort to improve their knowledge and skills. This way, we feel we contribute to the creation of equal opportunities for every student in the world. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Kingsley, someone who genuinely doesn't need a lot of introduction to the international education community. Al is the CEO of NetSupport, an influential tech company with global reach, and he has spent more than, 30 years, he will confirm, working at the intersection of education and technology from different places and spaces. Alongside that, he has been a school trustee for nearly 2 decades. He chairs the advisory board of the Institution of AI Education, a very important board in my opinion. And he sits on the UK Department for Education's Regional Schools Advisory Board. He's a prolific author. He's written 5 books on education and technology, including his most recent, The Awkward Questions in Education, that I have started reading right now, to be honest, researching and preparing for this conversation. He was named EduFuturist of the Year in 2023, and in 2025 he was awarded an MBE in the King's New Year Honours for his services to education. Al, it is a real pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Good morning, Kalimera.
Kalimera, that's the Greek word for good morning. I'm Greek for the people who do not know it. So thank you very much for taking the time. We are early in the morning in the UK, and I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you.
Looking forward to it.
Of course, focusing on AI, right?
Maybe.
I was thinking that with your expertise and experience that I just described, this conversation can easily become very broad and generic. So I would like to have a role play activity with you today, I thought. Right now, the thing dominating the conversation is AI in education. So we will, walk in these fields. Let's imagine newly appointed head of school in a medium-sized school, not flash, but not devoted of resources. I was just put in that position. My staff are professional, they're committed, students are committed, teachers are engaged. And the first thing I hear in my new position is, we have AI on the agenda, you need an AI strategy. Can you please coach me on how to do that?
Goodness, there's lots of different questions there. Shall I start by saying congratulations in your new role, if that's the case?
Thank you very much.
So I always argue that in order to move forward, you need to look backwards. So where's the school at? I'm certainly here in the UK. I often point towards Sir David Carter's model of looking at the state of a school, whether it's a school that's in a period of improvement and development, whether you're a school where you're trying to hold steady, maybe you're a school that's high performing but coasting, so you're looking at how to do things. And the reason why I say look backwards is because we often tend to be very good at having advice from folks that tell you what you could do and how you could do it, but we often miss the bit of the why. So my first question might be, why do you need to consider any change? Perhaps you have an amazing school that's performing to a high standard, and ultimately there are a few benchmarks we might hold against ourselves, but first it's about, are we making sure we've got the right outcomes for our children? But you'll probably then think, depending on where you are in the world, we call it a risk register or something different. What are the main challenges that are facing my school right now? And for some places in the world, that will be recruitment and retention. How do I keep high-performing staff within my budget? How do I give them the autonomy and purpose to feel motivated to work here? It might be, how do I convince young people to come into school? There's too much anxiety, social emotional pressures and health. It might be we're really struggling on our performance on our curriculum in certain areas, whether it's progress or just outright attainment for our learners. It could be, I've joined this new role, and the thing I need to think about is sustainability. And often in sustainability, we tend to immediately think of environmental factors. But at the highest level, sustainability is just how do you make sure your school will still be there in 5 years' time? So you start considering its reputation, its recruitment, its retention, its recruitment of students, depending on the status of your school, your finances, and from that you start to build a picture of what are the things that I want to shift. So I would normally say that any school, whatever its status is around the world, at some point you will want to have a reflect back on where you're at. You'll want to use that to create a growth strategy. Now, growth can mean different things. Sometimes it's about we do physically need more student numbers, or we need to bring extra school settings in place to allow us to have financial stability. Or it might be, actually, there's too much work for my staff, I can't afford more staff, we need to look at ways to work smarter and be more productive. Could AI be a lever that might unlock some capability? And if we get to that point, then we start with a plan that I think in a coaching sense is, here are the questions you might want to think about asking within your context, rather than here's a framework or a rule book, because the truth is it's different in every setting. As you know, there's going to be nuance, there's going to be a timing. And if I said to you, yep, AI, it's the panacea to everything, that's what you need, you might say, yeah, but Al, we haven't got good internet connection, we haven't got one device in the hands of every teacher, our staff are not technically competent, we haven't got anybody who can be a flag bearer, and remind me again, how will it make us better? And so I think we start with those questions, which we can then drill down on a little bit.
Let's focus a little bit on teachers and this retention problem that many schools around the world are facing. And also, they might not facing retention problems, some of them, but what they're facing is a more aged kind of teaching population, that they're not as competent, as interested even in technology and everything new that technology brings every couple of years. Very tired from technology transformation in schools. Right before COVID, and now AI, like everything has, we have been bombarding them with hundreds of new tools, hundreds of new methodologies, etc., etc. So they have started being a little bit reluctant to accommodate new things. How can a leader find the questions to navigate him or her, me, in that role place? How can I ask myself the right questions to help them improve the way they work so they are less burned out in reality, but without bombarding them with new processes, new expectations, new structures?
It's a really good question, but there's lots of bits that sit within that. I think the first thing to remember is, healthy skepticism is really important. I'm glad that we have educators who are like, I'm not so sure we need it. I don't know if we do. Doesn't always mean they're right, but again, there's a time and a place where technology adds value, and there's a time and a place where it does not. So within my own schools, here in sunny Peterborough, some of the best lessons have no technology at all, and I hope it stays that way. But where do we start? Well, what are we trying to achieve? The analogy that's often shared by folks is that a teacher's cup is already to the surface full. And we keep saying, how about you do this and how about you do that? But as leadership, we never say, what are you going to tip out first to allow you to do that? So I would argue when we talk about professional development, when we start thinking about how do we deliver it, how do we build teachers' confidence so that they can reflect and ask the right questions and think about how technology could be a lever, we might start by thinking about actually we need to change the way that we bring evidence-informed discussions around technology and in particular AI into the school on a more frequent basis, rather than for 2.5 hours at the start of the annual academic cycle where we have our inset. And I often use the example, I will change it based on the conversation I'm having with you. Imagine Panathinaikos only had training for 2 hours at the start of the football season, and then had some more right at the cup final. How poorly would they perform than having a regular discussion? And so with teachers, there's two parts. There's one is that no one's given me the evidence as to how this impacts. And the second one, which I think is perfectly reasonable, is fear. Whenever we talk about digital transformation in our school, half our staff will say this is amazing, an opportunity that we can innovate, create, try new tools, and the other half are, my goodness, I haven't got time, capacity, I don't know what this gives me extra. And so we start with, where does your time get spent? When we think about it, we're certainly within the classroom setting, we're thinking about technology with a pedagogy focus. So what are you trying to achieve? Where are the areas where there's development? Where could this free up time for you? And we might say, well, this is all new and there's no evidence it works. But personalized learning platforms have been available for years. Non-generative AI has been used in those tools for many years to allow a child, when they ask questions, to be taken on the next step and stretch and challenge, or take them back a few steps and develop their foundational knowledge. We've been using tools just to look at data and inform a teacher so that they can make better decisions in the classroom. Again, not data-led, but data-informed decision-making, which I think is a really important distinction. We can look and say, well, if we recognise as a school, and this comes down to leadership and communication, that this is not to replace you, this is to allow there to be more of you, more of the human in the loop, or in this case the teacher in the loop, because there's a difference. Just calling someone the human in the loop doesn't empower, but the teacher in the loop for more of the time. And so, the funny thing in a way is we want to talk about the technology and why we think you should have a think about AI in your classroom. But actually what we start with is that we need to emphasize the you, we value you. We value the human in the loop. We value the teacher in the loop. We're looking at ways, based on our risk register and the things that we're thinking about, we're looking at ways to free up your time so that you can use your professional skills more on your interaction and your teaching and learning with the human beings in the room. Maybe this technology might help reduce some of the administrative burden for you. Maybe it may allow you to close the feedback loop. But where we start is, like anything we're introducing, whether it's AI or any other digital tool, or actually, frankly, a change of policy, maybe a behaviour management policy. We start by saying this is what it looks like, what a good one looks like. Then we start with this is who the people are you can go to if you need to get some support. And then we go, we want you to try to adopt this, we want you to try and use it, but there's no sword of Damocles hanging over your head. When it comes to the adoption of digital, build your own confidence so that before you are expected to use it in the classroom. And I think most digital strategy, the failing comes in communication. We can think all around the world over the last 2 or 3 decades where we say, oh, the school system in America spent millions rolling out iPads and it all failed. Well, was it the iPad that was wrong, or was it the fact that nobody explained how to use it purposefully that would add impact or validity? And the same way in your school, if you go, surprise, new academic year, we've got this new technology and we're proposing to use AI, people are naturally going to say, well, how? But how are we going to measure it? So that comes full circle to my conversation with staff is, we are trying to mitigate these problems. We want to free up your time because we can see from a well-being and from a work perspective, this is not sustainable. Bear in mind, we're not looking to free up your time to give you something else. We're looking to free up your time so we get a better quality version of you. Secondly, we can see from evidence around the world that there are times when this particular tool can add value. We need to do our own experiments so we can develop our confidence. So we're going to introduce a small number of tools, not as a requirement, but tools that you can try. So typically, if you were a Microsoft Office 365 school system, you'd be having Copilot available to you, and you'd be saying, well, we're probably going to have a couple of other bits are going to appear with AI because, hey, we've got Canva, and it kind of comes in via the back door. If you're a Google, you're going to be saying we're using Gemini, and maybe we're going to add in Notebook LM. We might have some reasons for data considerations about where we store things. And we'll say for the very early state, we're going to give you 2 or 3 tools that have got AI within them. You're able to use them. We're going to give you an AI policy that sits around our digital policy. And this is the point where some schools get really excited and they wheel out a 300-page policy. And I just warn them, stop, take it away and burn it. Actually, think about it. You are signing into your computer this morning on a busy Monday morning in your classroom, and you've now got to remember how you can and can't use technology safely and purposefully. How about we think about it in 5 or 6 lines? Here are the 2 or 3 tools that you can use. You mustn't upload any personalised information to our learners, even though at the back end within our school we'll have it set to not support training the data for the tool itself. If you output or generate more than 2 to 3 lines of output, maybe you're thinking about revising or adapting a lesson plan or something else, you must cite it. This was created using this tool. The same way as you would if you lifted some text from somewhere else. If anything works really well, you get a really good output, please share it here. So we break out the silos and we create a space on our thing. And if we tried something and it was really rubbish, also share it here. And at the end of the term, we'll do a feedback loop of what worked well, what didn't work well. So we'll refine our evidence-informed base. And over a number of terms, we'll build up our confidence as educators. So that next year, when we talk about AI in the classroom, you can either say, I've got real confidence with this tool and I'm happy to use it for some problem-based or project-based learning with my learners. Or you've got confidence to simply have a conversation with your learners as to why it's not appropriate right now, but the things they might want to think about if they use it themselves at home. For example, building your confidence to say, it's an iterative process. You need to ask processing questions. Have you considered bias? Have you considered questioning the validity of the answer that you've got? And then we start moving to a whole different conversation, because the real conversation that's going on in schools, the awkward question that nobody really wants to talk about, on one hand is we're looking at AI predominantly at the moment to reduce teacher workload. That's the reality of where it is around the world. There's other great stuff, but that's the hardcore change. On the bigger stuff, what most experienced educators are saying is, I'm worried that children are cheating. What does this mean in terms of marking their work? And what does this mean in terms of significant change in what assessment looks like? Now that's a much more uncomfortable conversation to say, how do I know a child's cheating? How do I assess them? And so on. And I think it's a really important one. I recently spoke at a couple of events for the British Council for their international assessment conference. And there was most of the exam boards there, so potentially I wasn't the most welcome guest to be speaking at the end and challenge them. And that's partly because I don't believe that our current high-stakes assessment is fair and equitable for many learners. I don't think there are many educators that would disagree with me on that. Sometimes it's hard to get an alternative, but the question that really comes through to is, what's the most important qualification you would do academically on your journey? Probably would be your doctorate, and you would become Dr. Al. Imagine that. One day, maybe. I don't think so. But the more important thing is, how would I do that? I would go away and I would research for 2-3 years, write a very, very long thesis, maybe 40,000-50,000 words, a bit like writing on the way to write one of my books. But at the end of it, you would sit down with a panel of peers and you would have a viva. You would actually have a conversation where they would challenge your thinking, your reasoning, your research, and at the end of it would have a sense of whether you were right or wrong. And I always think, well, when it comes to this new world of AI and how did that child come up with that conclusion, the simple answer is ask them. Now, why is that uncomfortable? Well, on one hand, clearly a teacher will say to me, but I can't ask 30 children in a lesson about their work. I haven't got time. But if we work back, the bigger issue is, when we had the pandemic, something that none of us really like looking back on, we were forced for 2 years to have a position where we had our exams marked by our teachers and our schools graded. So we had what were perceived by governments as being artificially high results for our learners. Now I would argue they weren't artificially high, they were accurate because they were assessments done by teachers who knew the child's level of knowledge, and the child did it in a non-high stakes way. That meant that there was a greater sense of getting a real assessment for them. So our challenge really is that when we start thinking about assessment, we need to say that actually AI prompts us to move back to the way we used to do things, which is more about continuous assessment, more of that conversational, does the child have grip? And if I can capture evidence of knowledge, then I can change things. Now that's really simplistic, and there are tools being developed that help do automatic writing. I mean, we've got AI-powered tools now that, much like the old OCR, will scan a page of text, will take the writing, compare the writing to a national curriculum framework, provide feedback, and has consistently been proven to be more consistent than a human being. That doesn't replace the need for a human being, because we all know it's about nuance. But what it shows is there are tools that can save time and perform great. There are also some tools that say, hey, I'll save you 6 hours a day work by using my tool. And they should be avoided, because nothing can save you 6 hours a day.
Yeah, clickbait promises.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone off down a bit of a journey, but I suppose, if we come back to that thing, which is we've just set out a thing there, which is, listen, There's no great urgency. This year, we're going to talk about how you can use a couple, 2, 3 tools in a safe, controlled way where we can capture your feedback and that appears. We can signpost through the people you can go to if you need support. You're going to build your confidence so that when we start talking about it within a curriculum classroom setting next year, you're not the person least qualified in the room. You're the one in the room who can have that effective challenge with the learners. But we're not as a school saying you must use it. We're saying you can use these tools. I think there's a real distinction there. There's an irony here. With my work working for the Department for Education, sometimes I have to find a new home for schools. Schools that are struggling or underperforming, they join another entity. And we have a real challenge in our education system around the world where the one thing that actually teachers want most in terms of employment and longevity is to be trusted and valued and to have some degree of autonomy in their professional practice. And that's not necessarily unique to teaching, I would think. Most people would like those two variables in their lives. And then we have another challenge, which is but we can't afford to have too much variability within a school, let alone a school system, with how we deliver the curriculum and what tools we use and how we adapt it, because we need to have consistency. And if we take it to the nth degree, I was having a conversation a couple of days about this, if we take it to the point where every teacher can go free with the curriculum and talk about the way they want, then we run the risk that all of our learners leave the school system with a very different language about the same subjects, and then the twain do meet. So we have a challenge, which is how do we deliver and empower flexibility for staff to feel that they're using their professional skill set, but at the same time avoid too much drift where we start worrying about either, more importantly, obviously, the pedagogy side in terms of positive impact, but the other side, which is, we collect a lot of data, we use a lot of digital tools. It's not always purposeful. It's not always for benefit. We collect too much data, I would argue, and often we don't use it in a way that helps inform us and help us work more effectively. And then maybe we can talk about it. I think at the moment there's a big conflated battle around the world between EdTech is good, EdTech is bad. What do we mean by EdTech? Shall we just drop social media and AI into the same bucket and call it all EdTech? We shouldn't, but it's very easy to say, you know what, we're just scared of this device in the hands of a child, so let's just ban it. And I think it's foolish. I understand the intent, but I think that might be something we could unpick, because I think educators need to be part of that conversation too, and they're not necessarily. It's more actually parent and system driven at the moment.
Being the school leader I was saying earlier that I am, to what extent should I include students to the conversation of what is allowed, what is not allowed, what are the expectations of them using AI for doing schoolwork, for doing homework. I was in bed in January. I was in a very interesting panel of students, very, very eager students to do well in school, but explore the new landscape of what AI can give them. And they were like, our school is enthusiastic. They support us. They tell us, yes, go on, bring the new tools, bring the new things, and then all of a sudden we're cheating. So where does the enthusiasm and excitement to explore stops and then becomes cheating?
And it's very interesting, isn't it? I think the natural persuasion should always be co-production is king, and where we can catch a student voice, we should. The more the better. However, you also have to set a degree of expectation management around capturing student voice, what you are unable to adapt based on that voice. We can't be all things to all people. And so I think we'd be surprised that actually sometimes we think, well, all children are using AI to cheat. And the answer is most, if not all children, probably are using AI in some shape or form. But not all are using it for cheat, and actually sometimes the feedback that you hear is that children feel concerned if a teacher has used the tool to auto-mark or grade something and they've not had the value of that human feedback and taken the time to look at the work that I put in. Others are looking for guidance around, well, some of my peers are using this tool and I don't want to. How do I make sure that I'm not disadvantaged? And so it isn't always about children looking for the cheapest option. It's actually children looking for, how do I navigate what is a challenging pathway? How can I find ways where there's a good time to use AI and a bad time. And what does that look like? Is there a time where I can use it to challenge around a topic, but then use my human judgment to say how would I check that, whether it be for bias or whether I might take that project further, or more question, how I might just challenge it for accuracy. Do I think it's a good answer or not, and what would I do differently as a human being? So I think it's good to include learners. I think the key one on this, I always say, is we are prone in schools to being really, really good at thinking about the pedagogy, the strategies for how we teach young people, and we're really, really rubbish for the approaches and strategies we do for teaching our staff. And I mean teaching in terms of delivering CPD, professional development, and in this case, confidence. Because I think it's really, really wrong to say I want teachers to lead conversations around AI and all the different strands, which is just, I suppose, expanding on our digital citizenship journey, if they're not comfortable themselves with the core concepts. So those teachers that you identify who are less comfortable with technology, and maybe I can be really tough, I'm allowed to because I've got way too many grey hairs. Most senior leaders in our schools are going to be least comfortable with the use of digital and AI in the classroom because probably are the ones least likely to have used it themselves personally within their teaching practice, just based on a timeline. So it does actually require strong leadership confidence to delegate the conversation around digital strategy, with which AI is but one strand, down to middle leaders and other staff who come to the school with experience of using technology for purpose in other schools, or who can bring a sight of evidence-informed impact of technology, what worked well, what didn't work well. So we kind of go down where we actually need to empower some of the staff to share their insights and experiences and build out from that. I always think, from a leadership perspective, that there's always a challenge when you talk about delegating down. But there's also how do I maintain my own confidence of leadership. So in one of my books, My Secret EdTech Diary, I talk about change management, and I talk about things like Kotler's 8-step model, which is kind of, we focus on the urgency. We need to do something. We need to think about how these tools are done now, because there's both a risk and a reward. And then how do we build a coalition? Bring people together, that co-production. Then it's about how do we shape a vision. This is what we're going to do, and this is why it's purposeful. And then it's all about communication, making sure that we're not dragging people along, but we're bringing people along on the journey. And then as leaders, we're empowering our staff. Now you've got the framework, those core set of tools, you can use those. I want you to identify the quick wins, the things that we can actually measure impact. Then we want to look about how do we embed this so it's sustainable. So we don't just say we've got these great new technologies and the processes, but if Natasha ever leaves, we're done. Or how do we sustain things? And then also, how do we embed? How do we actually embed something permanently so that we get that consistent value? Now, in truth, something like that Kotter model is no different than if we were talking about oracy or about writing or about behavior management strategies than it is about digital and AI. But the same kind of framework is, by understanding how we deliver change, it empowers a leader to say, I can delegate but still feel in the loop, still feel reinforced. I can set the frameworks of how we measure output, and I can, at the end of it, look to say, how do I feedback a win? Because ultimately, in any school system, your head of school will be accountable either to a head of a cluster of schools or a leader, and then to a governing oversight that will sit there. And governance will always ask the questions of what you're doing, how we're going to measure it, and why are we doing this. Often we struggle with the measure because I think pretty much in every school system around the world, we would probably have the same thing, which is we are hard-coded in education to measure progress and attainment, fundamentally, and give it a score. And yet, if we go back to the risk register review as a new leader in your school, the things you might want to measure as the positive impacts of introducing AI into your school might be freeing up time, closing the feedback loop, better identification analysis of large blocks of data to help make more informed decision earlier. There are other things that mean that your measurements might be more around well-being and engagement and more human time that have more longer-term benefits but don't fit the traditional measures. So you also have to have a sense of, if I'm clear on my why, then maybe I need to define some different measures of output that actually give me confidence.
Another hype term I hear lately, and it was mentioned in my last board meeting as well, was agentic AI. All my tools have incorporated in some sort of form. I heard that it frees up so much time. It frees up I heard this thing that, it starts working before you even open your laptop, and it's worked 2 hours for you already before 8 a.m. in a school setting. And realistically, where do you, if you genuinely see agentic AI making sense, in what areas of a school operation system?
So for those listening, just to put in simplistic terms, we have our generative AI where we go into our web browser or the application that we have of our choice of large language model, and we ask a question and we iterate and it generates output. And agentic AI allows the tool to work without you needing to be there and initiating it. And often with our tools, and we think perhaps about, I'll use an example, there's plenty of other ones. We have Claude, which we use as our large language model, and we have our kind of co-browser where we can co-work with Claude, where it can actually interact with my screen and it can go away and do things for me. So I could have my agentic AI scan my inbox and reply to my emails. Now, I wouldn't be particularly comfortable about an AI tool answering messages from people that have messaged me without me having a chance to do my human in the loop bit. So, not so good. But I might say every day if there's a data drop, I'd like you to analyse it and give me an output report every morning by 8 a.m. that summarises all the things I need to be aware of that have changed. So, let's zoom out on a helicopter of a typical school. There's more technology, there's more administration outside of the classroom than there is in, particularly large school systems. So when we think about AI adoption, we also need to be mindful that actually it might help us be more effective with our finance and administration, where absolutely agentic AI might be more purposeful and more relevant. We might be thinking about our management information data and how we're creating and generating reports. Now, we can push things and we can say things like OpenClaw that have been discussed, which really kind of sits there and you give it full access to your accounts and services. I don't think we should be, and we need to be there in education right now. I think there is ways that we can link tasks together. So the very best agentic tools with AI all have a particular purpose. Just think of them as steps in a process. Your job is to open and read this. Your job is to file it in this bin. Your job is to decide where to send it to. Your job is to format it. And building those kind of models is where we start thinking about productivity and purpose. And I think there are lots of ways that can add value. I'm not as convinced right now that that's a classroom relevant purpose, because we need to keep reinforcing the idea that technology is not about replacing human beings in the teaching and learning example. It's about giving them more time to do their secret sauce better. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There's some online schools that use technology as as that kind of a co-teacher on the side, sage on the side, guide on the side. So there's times and places, but in essence, we all know human to human is when we all learn. That and when we struggle. So the other thing we have to be mindful of, and we might be deviating slightly from an agentic, but it still applies in the broader sense, is a word that everybody loves to, or a phrase everybody wants to use whenever we talk about AI in schools, is cognitive offloading. It's the consistent term that gets popped up in every document. Yep. I think now it's quite a cool term. If you don't say it, you clearly don't know what you're talking about. I'm saying that slightly tongue-in-cheek. And it's an interesting one, because I'd say sometimes I research things with AI and I discover all new things to learn, and it creates more cognitive load on me, not offloading. But there are times and places where I want a tool to offload for me, and there are other times I don't. So I think in round what I say is we've got a sequence. We have our non-generative AI where we just looked at data and came up with a conclusion, and we got our generative AI where we're creating new things based on a sequence of steps and interactions that we create. AI is just a prediction model at the end of the day. If we take it back down to the nuts and bolts of each token, what's likely to be the next thing that comes? We have our agents that are like, okay, go do the work when I'm not here. And there are some nice things. I mean, you don't need to be agentic to go to ChatGPT and say, every morning at 8 o'clock, send me a summary of all news around this topic. And if you're A science teacher or a history teacher, you might want latest news about a topic to help inform you on something. That's not really agentic, that's just another kind of example on the way. And we're moving ultimately to the world of general AI, where we start combining the physicality, the robots, the movement of AI with its technology to allow it to really deliver purpose in a self-operated way. But, and here's the question that I think is really important for school leaders to consider, and this comes back to the why question. Do we get to choose whether we do or don't give our children access to this technology? The workplace has already chosen. So the workplace is already digitally rich. The workplace has already identified that AI tools can reduce operational friction, can reduce operational costs. That's not always a good thing, because it's about replacing human beings in some places, but also to speed up productivity and promotion. So when employers come to look to employ people, they're not just going to say, how many of your traditional qualifications have you got? Employers are saying, I want people with the more human skills to complement my digital world. I want communication skills, critical thinking skills, oracy, speaking skills, creativity and imagination, resilience, all those human things that will allow me to differentiate my business from others by having the right kind of workforce. Now there's a good bit there, which is I think it levels the playing field, because every child's got the option to be successful in life, not just the most academic. But it also reminds us that even if we don't always align with technology, we still need to understand it to be able to have the conversation as to why, even if it's a negative why. And I think within AI, the truth is, the conversation we want to be having with our learners is about bias, is about risk, is about how do we deliver them with agency, how these tools can be used, but they might bypass them really learning. And we all know, if we just read something now and walk away, it'll be forgotten in 10 minutes. It's the process of actually trying to figure it out, that difficult bit that really embeds it from a learning perspective. So I think we can use more lived experience. I think we can empower our leadership team to think about the steps I can take to allow all of our staff and students to have a voice, how we can measure impact of a small number of tools. The bit that, like you did, going across to BET, I say to the team that I have within my multi-academy trust, my cluster of schools here in the UK, is when it comes to new technology, we have to be outward facing. We have to go see what others are doing. We have to capture that. And I think we're always naturally under pressure. Let's look within, and yes. I share things like Kotter's model and the ADCAR model, which is we've got an awareness and a desire. Now, how do we get the knowledge? We go out and we gather the knowledge. Now we've got the ability, we can start to reinforce that change, very people processed in the approach. But some people just go for that very simple model, which is we like to not have change in our organisation. We like to know what we're doing. And so you have like a lower model of you have the kind of the unfreeze, change, and refreeze. And it's like, okay, life isn't all about change, and that's not always the best thing for us to have real strength in there. We've been doing this for lots of years. Let's just pause. Let's just look at embedding something different that unlocks capacity or opportunity. And then let's lock that in, and we'll stay like that for the next few years. We'll actually embed that so we could get a chance to get the impact. I use something very personal and close to my heart. Just a messaging that I often say, which is, less is more. Unless it's chocolate. Now the chocolate bit is because I like chocolate. The less is more is that actually there's no prize for the school using the most technology. There's no prize for the fastest adoption of AI. There's a prize for actually understanding and using tools purposefully when they're required and being able to have confidence that they have an impact. And that requires professional judgment, but it also requires time to build up the evidence stream.
But can I afford to be slow? I bet this is a question a lot of heads and principals have at the moment. With the speed that everything moves at the moment, can I afford to wait? Can I afford to experiment slowly?
I guess there's a distinction here between can I afford to wait in being aware and understanding what's happening? And the answer is no. That's why your professional development means you need to be outward facing. You need to be, dare I say it, signing up to weekly newsletters on AI news and tips and reading and going to events and hearing what they're doing. When it comes to adoption, there's a bit more of a considered process because we don't want to keep changing our strategy every week. I think it's good to have, when it comes to AI, empowering a group of teachers who have confidence with those kind of technologies and tools to keep evaluating, so that when we talk about that core 2 or 3 tools, each year we might add in ones where we can see there's sufficient evidence. I suppose in truth, nobody wants to be the first to try a new tool, but once a few have, we want to look at our adoption options. Now, what we're seeing, I think, is a good thing. We've gone from a very small group of large language models that we could pick up, whether it was Google or, Microsoft, whatever we look at. Obviously we've got tools like Grok that I wouldn't probably recommend, but we've got those kind of core large language models. And over the last few years, we've seen a large number of more specialized education platforms that use those, but ring-fence those engines. Whether it's I don't know, everything from School AI to Toddle to there's a whole cluster, and all good brands recognised. But we've seen a continuing reduction down to specialist tools that just help you when it comes to your literacy assessment, or tools just around mathematics that have got AI infused. And I think we are on a journey that we will see more tools that are more specialised for education and more ring-fenced, because the bigger question we have is about where do we share our information, how do we keep our children safe. That's our more general data protection conversations. But I think we might be arriving at a more challenging proposition down the road. Because everywhere I go, I hear people saying, we need to protect our data. We don't want to be sharing with any of our training data. And then at the same time, I hear schools saying, I would use this technology, but it doesn't really reflect our community or our cohort. And I'm like, it won't, because you don't share any data, so how can it reflect your community and cohort? I spoke at a conference in Riyadh, and they just reminded me that I think it was 8% of the world speak Arabic, and 3% of the internet was in Arabic, and therefore the internet underrepresents cultural values from an Arabic perspective. I've had a lovely opportunity to meet with a team in the UK running the Mapamundi project, where they are identifying discoveries and famous events achieved by women around the world for the last 300 years that they're digitizing, because culturally any new discovery was never attributed to a woman until the last century. So what we need to be really mindful of is, if we're going to use more of these tools, we need to make sure that the output reflects the communities they serve. And by communities, we have to think about cultural diversity, we need to think about historical references, and we still, whilst we perhaps started off with the old, draw me a picture of a doctor and it's always a white man in a coat versus a nurse and it's a lady. We're now much more subtle and nuanced, but we're still, I did an interview on Saturday morning with Victoria Headland, the AI bias girl. But we still have the idea that if we want to talk about how a light bulb works, boys get mechanics and rockets and girls get explained it by the power of magical unicorns. And there's still this hidden bias that the way we explain an example. And the reason why I think this is really important is she highlighted that there are tools, that AI tools, that universities use as part of their application and careers development process.
Yes.
And so she was saying, well, she's a physicist and she's a very, very capable woman, but she was saying, putting herself into those same tools, the messaging for her by using her name Victoria was, you've done really well, do you think this is the right career, this is a very challenging environment, and so on. And changing her name to a boy's name, it immediately said, this is fantastic, step up and you'll be amazing. It was almost like it's hard-coded, probability-wise, that because the training data suggests that the most likely model output of that will be a man in that role, then my feedback will enforce that. So we've still quite a long way to go. And all of that comes full circle to saying to, okay, leaders, you've got concerns about these new technology, which we can't stop. It's on its march. You worry about what it means for our learners. You worry about how it affects teaching and learning. You worry about the risk of them seeing bias in their output or false information. Are you going to abdicate your role in that conversation, or are you going to embrace understanding it so that you can help steer them on that journey? Even if your learning is to put you in a stronger position of approving or disapproving of the technology. I think it's incumbent on us to take that step and understand it. There are risks, there are concerns around it, But I always believe education, being a voice of good and power, we can't afford to say there's just one thing too many, we're just going to leave it to somebody else. Because you'll get the wrong answer. You'll get politicians and parents making the decisions, well-intentioned, but the optics will be different. And we'll get the conversation like we have now, which is, let's just not have technology in the classroom.
Yes.
There's plenty of evidence of the impact and benefit of technology. The risk is the impact of a child using social media and spending too much time either having the wrong visual reinforcement or being taken down lines. And there is absolutely now evidence of some of the anthropomorphized AI chatbots that children are developing a more personal, humanized relationship with, that by the nature of large language models wanting to always provide approving and supportive feedback to your questioning, will take you down a journey where if you're depressed or negative, where it will reinforce the reason why you're depressed. So all these things come back to, God damn it, we need to supervise this. Therefore, we need to be the qualified ones in the conversation.
And have the conversation open for the students to discuss these things and see why they're getting the answers they're getting, why they're even asking the questions they're asking to that bot and not the classmate next to them. Maybe that's a more, useful discussion.
If you take your point there and take it into the corporate world, which I sometimes, people say, you can't put corporate into education. It's very different and you wouldn't understand. Actually, there are some things you can. We've all heard of McKinsey, and we respect much of the work that McKinsey does. When it comes to McKinsey's perspective on how do we deliver change management within the organisation, they have the 7 S's. So, strategy, coming up with a plan. Structures, systems, shared values, which is all about bringing together those different voices, developing skills, style, the way we do it, and empowering staff. Now, obviously, if we take that into a school setting, as well as staff, we'll have another S and say students on the end there. But fundamentally, we can still follow those bits because all of these conversations, AI is just an amplifier for a very fast-changing world, come down to leadership is about always coming back to the why. And if you come back to a why, you need to add on the end, and how will I measure that?
Exactly.
And be bold in the fact that measurement will be different to the traditional ones because you can't keep sticking to the same few measurements.
It is the nature of the profession and the expectations of the other parents and the community. Our founder very often says that I found it very interesting, if you think about it, that if you go to a dentist and see 50-year-old machinery, very old plays, very outdated kind of scenery, you get a little bit anxious. If you get it at a school and you see it exactly as it was 50 years ago, you might not be so worried about your child.
Well, but I think that might be changing. I agree with you. We quite like the continuity, the consistency of the education establishment. But right now we've got parents getting a little bit nervous about what the future holds, and because we hear so much negativity about social media and about digital technology, I think parents are starting to think maybe there's too much. Can we switch back a bit away from it? The thing we need to remember is the education system, kind of as we know it, was kind of developed by universities, those kind of higher education establishments back in the late 1800s, 1870-ish, where everything was about creating a front door. We can't have 100% of our learners going on to further education, otherwise it devalues the qualifications and degrees that we issue. So we create a threshold, only half can come through. And then we create exams for our learners where we create a threshold, only half can come through. And finally, with the advent of technology, which says, no, it's not about how much you know, it's about what you can do that really matters, because AI does the what you know. You know, that bit about education thrives in a knowledge-sparse environment, but when knowledge becomes rich, education has to move, and it is struggling to move. So with this sudden change where it's all about skills. Now, it doesn't mean you abdicate knowledge, because firstly, knowledge gives you context, so you need context and skills for that agency. But it starts to reshape the way that we look at things. And I think that's why school leaders need to be really mindful that whether you're the owner of your school, the school leader that is responsible for that sustainability and will be a thriving school, and for reassuring parents that we're equipping our children for the 21st century and the new workplace, but we're doing it at a pace that means we continue to have an eye to safety, to efficacy and evidence in what we do, that everything we do will be about pedagogy first. Now, there are some school systems where there's an expectation when they walk in the door of your school, they see lots of new technology, and parents buy or pay for the school that has the most innovation and technology. But we all know it's not about the shiny. It's about is this a sustainable thing? So I think that pace of doing it. And then there's, like you could self, which is be a vehicle to share best practice and ideas with others. Capture folks around the world and share it. You know, these conversations, I'm sure you will take elements back to your school and think, how can we apply these with all of the people that you interview on the radio? And I call myself, first and foremost, an edu magpie, which is I'm blessed to travel around the world and see amazing school systems. Or I'm asked to talk at a conference. Well, if I talk at a conference, 4 hours of that conference I'm sat listening to other inspiring people, and I take away their ideas and suggestions. Or I go into a school that's failing or struggling and see amazing teaching in spite of struggling with finances or leadership. And so those are the best things that we take back and we learn. It's very rare that anything we think of has never been done by anybody else. You know, we're probably too arrogant if we think that's the case. So it's really a case of how do we look harder across our community to find the evidence and answers that we need.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is at the core of our values as an organization, because we really think, and this is in reality the reason behind us being created, the fact that we know that the power of picking up the phone and asking a colleague, if you're ahead, okay, what do you guys do when it comes to assessment now that AI has disturbed the system? I'm very, very grateful for your time. This is going to be my last fast question. Doing this exact same thing, like picking up from your experience and dialogues you have with all these people, can you give us, without names, or of course you can name them if you want, one great thing that you recently heard that the school does, and an excellent case study of incorporating AI, not necessarily in classroom and teaching, but in school operations?
So I think in the context of what we've been discussing today, is a school that empowers teachers within the context of their data protection assessment. So in many schools we undertake something around the world. It often has different names, but it's called a data protection impact assessment. So what data is captured, where is it stored, who has access to it and for how long. So that's our security bit we think about. About creating that feedback loop where staff actually are able to access and use technology themselves to develop their skill set. Time is provided for them to do additional professional development. And then terminally, they have what is best acquired as an internal teach meet, which is a stand-up show and tell, 2-3 minutes. What worked well, what didn't. They created a framework, in this case on Teams, where rather than being siloed by departments, they had where they would share prompts and resources that they've used that work well and been iterated that others could use across the cluster of schools. But the key thing was that they were happy to empower staff to try tools, to bring the sharing back to a central point with the Teach Me, and then adapt again. And it was very much a termly rinse and repeat as we embed. And the key, which I think is why I kind of flag it, is because in many schools, I meet amazing folks, like yourself, who are out there looking at technology and what's happening. But the school is vulnerable that if you leave, the knowledge and the muscle memory goes with it. And so putting in strategies about sharing and embedding it across all staff and them all being part of that. Let me show you what I did that worked really, really well. Or just as importantly, I was told this product was amazing. I did this and look at that, it's rubbish. You know, let's make sure that all of our staff across our cluster of schools don't waste any time revisiting that particular thing. I think it's hugely empowering. It also empowers senior leaders who've got no confidence with some of the digital tools, some have of course, to engage and listen to those conversations and build their own professional skill set, awareness, but also just simply get the confidence that their team have got this. And I think that's really empowering too, you know, and then you set your own pace, your own journey. You've got evidence for your governance if you're having really good co-produced conversations. Of course, some of those teach meets, maybe you can have a student voice come into that as well. And then my final bit was around that is the schools that actually are comfortable doing regular surveys to their staff, simply asking them. They can be anonymous about confidence levels, because I tell you what, in most schools, when you go in there saying we want to talk about AI and building in skills, your first survey will be that actually your staff aren't very confident with the basic tools they've got, and they'd like a bit of time to help them see how they can use, whether it's Excel spreadsheets and doing formulas more effectively, or we've moved to iPads and I'm not sure how we split the screen, or we move and copy between things. Often it's building confidence in the muscle memory of the basic tools that becomes highlighted first, and that's okay too, because all of this is about a journey, and if we want teachers to use technology more purposefully, then the device in their hand they have to be confident with too.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I'm keeping a lot of things out of this conversation, but if I'm still the head of that little school that does well but wants to do better, I'll make sure that tomorrow start working on my 3 questions. What am I going to do? Why am I going to do it? And how am I going to measure success of the experiment?
Exactly.
Thank you very much for being my coach today. I can't thank you enough for your time. It was a great conversation. We will see you again out there drawing from your experience and expertise on various occasions, I'm sure. So to all our listeners out there, to 4 continents, Europe, America, Africa, and Asia, thank you very much for being with us. Of course, I'll leave Al's social media accounts in the description to reach out to him. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.